Hello, bruvs. We're back with Dagny. Let's turn the light. Dagny. Dagny. Look at that. Dagny Juel Przybyszewska. The Woman and the Myth. It's a 1991 book, I believe. And she was a muse for many of the bohemians in Berlin in the 1890s. 2. The Myth. You had to experience her to be able to describe her. Munch was to have said of Dagny. Munch, who described a woman of unique beauty and complexity in his painting of her from 1893. She seems to rise out of a translucent blue mist, slender, clothed in a black dress that barely exists, a hint of bat's wings in its puffed shoulders. A nearly invisible halo of increasingly larger rings emanates from her white face. The focal point of Munch's vision, her expression, is open, inviting, seemingly benign, somehow sad. Her eyes are veiled. She may be holding her hands provokingly behind her back or protectively in front of her. She is at once spirit and flesh, angel and demon, in ecstasy and in mourning, of life and of death. Munch could not resist making a mystery out of Dagny Juel Przybyszewska. Neither could most who met her. Within weeks of her arrival in Berlin, she had become the undisputed, if controversial, muse of the artists of the Schwarzwälder Circle. An anonymous author wrote just after her death, "Spirit shone in her smile, in every movement of her supple limbs that were wrapped in a loose hanging gown, and everyone she spoke to became spiritual. She only had to look at you, to lay her hand on your arm, and suddenly you found expression and form for one thing or another that you had long gone and wrestled with. She was the intellectual midwife for these poets, born in pain." Adolf Paul remembered her as Strindberg did. One day she walked into Ferkeln, with Munch, blonde, slender, elegant, and dressed with a refinement that well knew how to accentuate the body's suppleness, but avoided revealing too definite contours. She wound around between the narcissistic genius snobs, captured them one by one, and masterfully played the role of the idea for each, until she had him in her net and could see behind the scenes of his life's mystery. Then she laughed at him and threw him out of the boat. Stash Przybyszewska wrote to Paul in the first months of his relationship with Dagny, "Yes, I knew no love, knew not myself, and all that was unknown to me, the unconscious mainsprings of my behavior and actions. That which was my soul's great secret, she elicited. In her, the mysteriousness of my soul was embodied. Yes, you see, she is my highest intellectual and aesthetic pleasure." Strindberg named her Aspasia, mistress of Pericles, friend of Socrates, a woman known for her great intellect, sensuality, and influence with men of power. Dagny's ability to inspire myth-making reached beyond the intimate inner circle of the Schwarzwälder, and the myth she inspired grew beyond the muse. Whether dangerous or benign, she was an angel, a wood nymph, a vestal striding toward the temple. Eurydice, is that how you say that? Eurydice? Gliding into the night. Judith, sneaking to holler the Holofernes' tent. She was the new woman, the singular, phenomenal, and fascinating creature, Dutcha. I'm just going to say Dutcha. Too lazy to look it up. Who was then 20 in some years, was an amazing woman with whom all men fell in love, and whom all women admired. She had slightly wavy hair that fell seductively about her temples and cheeks. In a word, she was, in a certain sense, the prototype for the worshipped modern woman. She acclimated herself completely to her new role, and in return enjoyed the admiration, if not to say worship, Przybyszewska in his literary ecstasy paid her. A similar legendary radiance encircled her in the bohemian circles in Berlin. Franz Survey, literary critic and member of the Schwarzferkel Circle. I still say it's the dumbest literary movement in the world. The Ferkel Schmerkel. The Schwarzferkel Circle. Wherever they, Statue and Dacia, went, they were followed by a group of young people, Ida, Auerbach, Demel. The same aura that surrounded Dagny's presence in Berlin followed her to Poland, where she once again was made the queen of the avant-garde bohemians, the artists of the Young Poland Circle, who held court in the Krakow tavern known as the Peacock. One of Przybyszewska's admirers wrote, "We only knew that she was beautiful and that she was always with him. She had to become our Astarte." Don't know how to say that one either. Goddess, queen, sovereign, the prophet's companion, consequently the prophetess. In Dagny we saw the prophet's mistress and friend, androgyny, the absolute, his happiness, his origin, the original source of ecstasy, madness, and inspiration. And once again she drew a following of the young, the romantic, the rebellious, and the artistically inclined, so much so that they were said to have come to Peon after the theater just to get a glimpse of her. The myth took on meanings far beyond her person. She became akin to a living work of art. All the billowing, the elusiveness, the moving that we later met in excess in painting, we had seen born in her, said Ida Demel. People literally saw her as if she had been cut out of a masterpiece. One described her as a Botticelli. I noticed her curly silken hair that surrounded her narrow, oval face, hid her ears, and formed something of a golden frame, broken by fine coils and convolutions around her head, like airy golden yellow down under her regularly shaped eyebrows gazed light blue, peaceful, cool eyes with dark rings under them. Alfred Wysocki. Another described her in terms suggestive of Rossetti's overwhelming pre-Raphaelite women, not at all beautiful and still seductive like no other, tall, lean, supple, with dark bangs and light eyes under the half-shut, tired eyelids, completely dry, stiff, curly, brown-red hair that bristled with every touch like ripe rye before a storm, a mouth that was way too big as it shone so brightly purple-red over the sharp, snow-white, genuine Norwegian teeth. Anonymous. A third saw her bathed in Rembrandt twilight. The salon was large and dark. 2 empty bottles served as candlesticks. The whole interior was atmospheric, like a Rembrandt twilight painting. Dagny was carried away playing music at the piano. Johannes Schlaff. Many were reminded of Leonardo's Mona Lisa. This distinguished and silent woman seemed secretive and distant as her smile, distant as the look in those oval veiled eyes, half covered by her heavy, shimmering gold eyelashes, someone from Krakow. Dagny Juel Przybyszewska, as she lived even, became part of the romantic iconography of the fin de siècle. I will look that up by the time I finish this book. Where the woman ended and the myth began is, in a very real sense, impossible to determine. Dagny, in collaboration with her contemporaries, generated the myth, and though she was separate from it, she was inextricably and actively at its core. She was a sophisticated, intellectual woman in love with the art of the avant garde. She lived at the center of a group of artists caught up in the excitement of breaking new ground. These were the early moderns, distrusting of all authorities save the unconscious, anxious to turn their own lives into art. Dagny was just as anxious. It would be a mistake to see her simply as a victim of the fantasies she inspired, a woman undone by the overwrought, misogynist male imagination of the late 19th century. This would be to deny the woman and the myth the very real power. Though she could not control the exaggerated forms it took or its ultimate impact on herself or others, she was obviously aware of the myth she generated. As a writer, she self-consciously chose it as the subject of her texts, exploring its seductive allure and its tragic underside. The myth was fed both by truths and by lies. Whether people encountered Dagny first or second hand, they found her persona so provoking that they easily distorted fact in an attempt to recreate the woman they thought they had experienced. They found her as unique as they felt they themselves were. Depending on predisposition, some responded to the beauty in the vision, some to its sensuality or spirituality, many to the duality of body and soul. Everyone seemed to be, though, when all was said and done, a little mystified. They were prepared to see something, but they were not sure what they saw. They responded with both marvel and anxiety to a woman so indeterminate. Intense subjectivity gave rise to a web of often conflicting fictions. Her entire person and being had a strangely calming, at the same time inspirational effect, like fresh forest air, Munch. Comfortable in her presence, no one was, not even those who desired her the most, Anonymous. And again, Dagny was unresistant, lacking strong will. The wave of life had been carrying her without any resistance. Lucina Katurbinska. She had a provocative word for everyone, raised him up to her, and thrust him away again. Thrust him away again. She was a very eloquent queen, full of arrogance, bold impudence, and boyish superiority. Julius Meyer Graf. With unaffected obviousness, she surveys our room, completely calm, and gives herself a lot of time, as when one looks at one's own room, in which the furniture present is well known and is in its place. It's only on me the curious eyes loiter, surveying and testing, as if on a new piece of furniture. It is a test almost to my advantage. There is something benevolent and still painful, surprising in the approbation between two women. Absolutely nothing malicious or hateful, but openly curious and strictly matter of fact. Purely an accountant's look, weighing an affair, and contrary to expectation, finding the object serviceable. Frida Uhl. That's the way she always is. That's just it. The snake remains cold. That doesn't make it less deadly. Now she's going to take aim at your heel. Strindberg, as filtered through Uhl. And how she could set to work and help. It was Dagny, almost more than myself, who took hold of my exhibitions in Berlin. Munch. What's she just going to quote here for the whole chapter? I hope not. It kind of seems like it. And how she could set to work and help. It was Dagny, almost more than myself, who took hold of my exhibitions in Berlin. Munch, I already read that, didn't I? She sat upright and silent on the rug in the simple gallery, where her friend, the Norwegian painter Edvard Munch, ran back and forth hanging his paintings. Franz surveyed. There was not even any agreement on the color and texture of her hair, gilded hair, fine like silk, completely dry, stiff, curly, brown-red hair that bristled with every touch like ripe rye before a storm, curly blonde hair, hair that formed a gilded halo around her face, frizzy, dark blonde hair, golden red hair. In addition to being tainted by subjectivity, many of the memories were recorded after Dagny's violent death at a very young age, which made her an even more provoking subject. Time dulled the facts. Many acquaintances, who became mini artists in their unusually emotional attempts to recreate her, were given an even freer hand with the truth. Yet, within the very confusion of history lies a key to understanding the powerful myth Dagny embodied. A myth, by very definition, grows old or grows out of a combination of falsehoods and truths. As Nina Auerbach has written, myth is an uncomfortable word, poised uneasily between rejection and embrace, apocrypha and dogma, arousing our trust and dispelling it simultaneously, remaining with us longer, perhaps, than do those things we know to be lies and truth. At the same time, if it is firmly rooted in the age from which it springs, a myth becomes its own truth, a distillation of the essence of a culture, a projection of its dreams and fears. Auerbach convincingly argued that in the last half of the 19th century, a myth was born of a female hero, a single vivid creature of seemingly endless mutations and personae. She was queen, victim, angel, demon, fallen woman, able to change shapes at will, alone and in command. In the composite of her manifestation, she became a shaping principle for new forms of life. Victorian culture, said Auerbach, had no firmly rooted imagination of adult womanhood, and so envisioned a creature of almost infinite mobility. In the northern European circles in which she lived, Dagny Juel Przybyszewska generated precisely such a myth of feminine transcendence. She seemed to break down temporal and material limitations, giving rise to fantasies of new, ever-changing forms of life. No single persona captured the essence of all the others as did the solo dancer, who seemed to defy the laws of matter. She was also something that was for that time very unusual, a kind of solo dancer, the only one in our closest circle. There was something of the wood nymph, the mirage in her dance, something fantastic and magical that completely bewitched the spectators, Franz surveyed. Her body found limitless possibilities for expression in the measured, nearly commonplace rhythm. With the first glance, her arms seemed to fasten themselves unmovably around your body. With a movement full of promise, she stretched them out, let them flutter in the air, and lift over her head. In her hands she held wreaths of flowers. Like a vestal, she strode toward the temple. Like a Eurydice, she glided into the night. Like a Judith, she snuck to Holofernes's tent. Her well-formed head bobbed like a little boat and disappeared into the cloudy mist. In this cloud, her face shone with a phosphorescent light. Julius Meyer Graf. Dutch's party, Dutch's evening. Never before in my life had I seen anything like her dancing. She was as shapely as a rush and just as supple. She rested in men's arms as lightly as a veil. A flock of clouds, you thought undeniably of the movements of a flower when you saw how proud she carried her beautiful little head on her straight, well-formed neck. Ida Demel. What's up, bruv? Alone, constantly in motion, and endlessly mutable, Dagny awakened dreams of undiscovered possibilities, and they were ripe for it, these artists of the Finn, the Sequel, I don't know how to say it, with whom she associated, the famous and the not so famous, desperately seeking forms through which to move beyond the barriers of their own consciousness. Dagny seemed to her contemporaries to speak a mute language pregnant with mysteries from beyond the grave. She gave them the electrifying feeling that she had something to reveal to them if they could only understand her. A Pole who, as a boy, had met her in the mountain resort town of Zakopane, wrote, "Today it seems to me, though it may be just my imagination, that she had a remarkable intuition that reached far beyond the boundaries of the present. She was surprised herself by these mysterious premonitions, which gave her material for new dreams and fantasies of unknown combinations." Oh. If we are really to understand the power of the Dagny myth, we must first isolate its parts in order finally to suggest the essence of the whole, i.e., a myth of feminine redefinition. All the elements are contained in the persona of the solo dancer, but it is illuminating as well as restorative to view the individual faces of this fascinating modern woman. She was unique. Dagny not only appreciated eccentric people, she was herself eccentric, very talented, Munch. She was talked about with admiration and interest, as if she were the only woman of her kind, Julius Bab. Dagny was perceived to be different in intellect, looks, and allure. Though people identified her difference in varying ways, all seemed to agree that they had never seen anything like her before. She fades in and out of the persona of a tall, slender, dark blonde woman with a Greek profile and aristocratic hands to become something else entirely, like a statue coming to life in unexpected ways. Frida Uhl experienced her to be less than more than she had imagined. What's up, bruv? All at once, we, Uhl and Strindberg, hear steps, light steps nearing, and suddenly the door, shoved by a hard hand, flies wide open and gapes blackly at us. Two women, the first one walks past so fast that her flame-red blouse still flashes like fire, but the other one stands there demonstratively and looks in without setting her foot in the door or greeting us. Strange. It seems to me I've seen her before, or rather her beautiful sister. She herself is actually not half as pretty as my dim memory. A beautiful figure, tall and smart, dressed in distinguished colorless gray. Curly blonde hair over her eyebrows. Underneath rises up a fine nose. Her lips are narrow and nervous, her teeth white. The most beautiful thing about her are her aristocratic hands, the well-dressed feet, and her lack of weight. Une belle femme. Una belle femme? She is hardly the traditional femme fatale. She is not either. She makes her impression through her expression. Star Island. It's a lot less dry. Don't know what it is. For some, like Uhl, beautiful did not seem to be the right word to describe her. Not at all beautiful and still seductive like no other, anonymous. She was perhaps more charming than beautiful, distinguished, dressed with studied simplicity, Polish friend from Paris. For others, beautiful was precisely the right word. Physically, she was extraordinarily beautiful. Not even the time's terrible fashions could distort her figure. She wore with regal dignity the old clothes she inherited from her rich sister in Stockholm. Thaddeus Boy Zelensky? What kind of name is Boy? Maybe it was Zelensky's cousin. Many responded with a kind of totemistic, never heard of that one, totemistic reverence to a curious energy in her body. The face is singular, aristocratic, winningly full of life. There is something searching in it, something testing the air. There's a trembling about the nostrils. She holds her eyelids lowered, but the eyes still stare out audaciously, Strindberg as filtered through Uhl. There was something regal about her, something enchanting in the very way she moved. She was very beautiful, and she had the most perfect hands I have ever seen, unbelievably white and restless. Joppa Nilsson. Her eyes still look at me. I cannot forget them. Not because they bewitched me, but because they had something to tell me. It was not a hypnotic look, rather the opposite, passive, but at the same time curious, a kind of mute language I could not understand. The Pole, who as a young boy met Dagny in Zakopane. It is impossible to determine from where Dagny's enticing energy came. It does seem certain that it was due in great part to her being perceived to be a woman of remarkable spirit, sensuality, and significantly intellect. Madame Dagny was characterized by her unusual intelligence and her extraordinary breeding, Polish necrology. She was the best educated. I mean, what the hell is this? Just a bunch of quotes? Munch. Without any doubt, I see it such that the center, the original source of the fantastic ideas which they embraced and played with, in this circle was Madame Dagny. Her opinions and formulations, her grasp of the questions seemed almost like revelations. Even old foxes thought so. Polish friend from Paris. At the time, Stash was really a poet. I didn't doubt for a minute that it was thanks to Madame Dagny that he had reached the heights. She had a penetrating and quick intellect. She was so straightforward and had such a sensitive and warm heart as one only sees in such people who have come into the world to experience and understand all human feelings. Polish zoologist from Paris. Her intellectual niveau was also in every sense modern, Franz Servet. A woman who was highly intelligent, physically alluring, and kind was a most uncommon phenomenon, particularly in a time when women were divided into those of the upper classes who were taught to cultivate their heads and hearts, and those of the lower classes who were forced to cultivate their bodies. Even some of the most progressive women adhered to the rightness in this dichotomy. For example, critics and writers such as the Swedes Ellen Key and Laura Marholm and the Norwegian Amalie Skram saw the sexual woman both as a victim of malabuse and a threat to women of substance. Scandinavian women writers of the 1890s in general revealed a crippling ambivalence to the sexual woman, preferring the fashion heroines who could rely on their intrinsic innocence as the most profound truth of their identity. Dagny, as a woman and as a writer, rejected innocence in favor of the more complex woman who incorporated the sexual as a significant determining aspect of herself. In Dagny, the unnatural divisions disappeared, making the sensual seem spiritual, the intellectual seductive, the spiritual so astonishingly physical. Munch saw it. Her unbelievable beauty and electrifying nature and intelligence, and so Norwegianly feminine and personal, and kind and cheerfully attentive to everyone, exotically aristocratic, all of this did not give the scandal mongers peace in their dark corners. Adolf Paul saw it in his more conflicted way. A classically pure profile, her forehead shaded with a confusion of curls, so that one could at one's pleasure estimate its height, and thus even the possibilities of intelligence. A smile that awakened the longing for kisses, but at the same time fear of the 2 rows of pearl white sharp teeth which behind the thin lips waited for the chance to bite. She was awe-inspiring, this complex woman who was redefining what women could be. Not surprisingly, she gave rise to wonder and contempt. Let's take a look at her. Oh, there she is, naked, apparently. There she is. She died at 33, mind you. And right there, she does not look like a beautiful woman. I'm not trying to say she was homely, but she was hardly strikingly beautiful. Dagny, Zakopane, 1890. You like men? That's fucking great. Don't ever say something stupid like that. If you got a real comment, say it. Otherwise, you're a moron. Alone, her primary magic power consists in the fact that she is the only unmarried woman in the camp, and she knows how to make use of the situation. Strindberg has filtered through Uhl. I mean, in defense of nature, you got a bunch of artists, horny artists, and you got this woman who just comes and avails herself to them. I mean, it's kind of not hard to think she's the most beautiful woman when you're hanging out with bros all the time, as has been documented. Now, after her death, when I try to recall what she looked like, I always see her dressed in black, disheartened and with bowed head. She didn't seem to notice her surroundings at all. Actually, I never saw her like that while she still lived. She was always surrounded by people. She was always loved. Gabriela Zapolska. Dagny was remembered not only as being unique, but as being alone, in spite of the fact that she gained her reputation primarily in the crowded haunts of the Bohemians in Germany and Poland, and that her fame presumably derived from her associations with famous men. In the description of her form, the Ferkel group, whether as Munch's nurturing angel or Paul's serpentine temptress, she rises out of the mass of others as the men become her blurred backdrop. The sheer numbers of men with whom she was rumored to be associated, both in Berlin and Poland, ensured that they would recede into the shadows, interchangeable somehow with one another, as she gained her reputation for being interchangeable with no one at all. She was the one, they were the many. I mean, that still makes you a hoe. Julius Meyer-Graf, for example, describing the atmosphere in Dagny's and Stosch's Berlin apartment in Luisenstrasse, remembered Stosch playing the piano, Dagny dancing with one friend while two others watched. One danced with Ducha, and the two at the table looked on. The one was Munch, the other, as a rule, Strindberg. The four men were all in love with Ducha, each in his way, and didn't let it show. As Norwegian critic Sonja Hagemann pointed out many years ago, Strindberg could not have been a member of the foursome, though people continue to be tantalized by the notion that he was. In terms of the myth about Dagny, it does not really matter who was there. The one abiding truth was that she was sovereign. The man with whom Dagny was magically wedded in people's minds was, of course, Stosch. They were thought of as inseparable. Ida Demmel wrote about the harmony in their voices when they spoke to each other. Stosch spoke a gentle, broken German, Ducha just a little German as Polish, but their conversation rang like the most beautiful chord, as if a maestro played the viola and was accompanied by a finely tuned violin. I will always be able to hear their hushed voices. Yet even as the two seem to be as one, it is Dagny who is seen as the shimmering soul of the pair. Again, Demmel. Stosch without Ducha was a person who lived at loose ends, a homeless eccentric, a typical bohemian. When Ducha was at his side, a center was suddenly created, a focus from which a magical and enchanted sheen was cast over those people who knew enough to appreciate art. The Norwegian sculptor Gustav Vigeland said later in his life, and the only woman was Fru Przybyszewska, sick. Oh, he said Shevsky. She had green eyes, a red dress, and danced for us, and we all desired her. Vigeland's sculpture, Waltz 2, possibly inspired by Dagny, and Stosh gives the woman the same exaggerated status that Dagny was perceived to have. It is she who determines the parameters and the sweep of the piece. And there's the piece. Traditionally, a woman alone was a dreaded metaphor for inferiority of soul and failure in life. Dagny's aloneness, however, was a fantasy of unlimited possibilities and thus a wellspring of strength. Spiritual, animal, ordinary, and magical, she seemed to dissolve into sheer energy. Her long, tight-fitting gown became a burning streak when she danced. Julius Meyer Graf. At the same time, there was something ominous in such omnipotent singularity, a hint of tragedy that played in the shadows of the myth, as if such a woman was doomed, as the Polish writer and critic Gabriel Zapolska wrote. An aura of bewitchment hung about her. One sensed that she belonged to a race of women who are destined by fate for destruction. And magical. She was compared to a wood nymph, this magical creature that constantly appears in new shapes. She exuded an indescribable enchantment in her manner of talking and being, but above all in her dancing. Her inventiveness was inexhaustible. She entertained no apprehensions when it came to getting herself out of the material difficulties that constantly arose. She was born to be queen in this group of artists, Julius Bob. Ducha is enchanting. If she carried white lilies in her hands, she would be seen as a symbol of forever changing life. I always envision her as a singing angel, an angel with a cigarette in her mouth. She even smokes in a nearly ethereal way, and small heavenly rings float like a halo around her lips. A woman friend from Norway. Dagny gave the impression of being of several worlds at once. As the smoking angel, she was both angelic and demonic as the solo dancer, of matter and air as the muse, creative and destructive. She was of the poetic and the prosaic, the sublime and the mundane. It is said that she is frail. She looks like an ethereal dream. When her husband speaks Polish when they're alone at home or out in a restaurant and she doesn't understand anything or is tired of listening, she lies down and sleeps on the sofa where the men have thrown their coats. She, who makes such a poetic impression, must look funny there in those surroundings, sleeping on the coats. Helena Polakowska. The woman seemed to slip invisibly into other forms of life, flowers, birds, and animals, even as she remained woman. Johannes Schlaf remembered her one summer day in Berlin as the huge sunflower she wore. She was tall and well built, dressed in a thin dress. Her blonde hair was shiny but not very well combed. She had gotten the original idea to fasten a large sunflower on her breast. Because of her unbelievable figure, she gave the impression herself of being a sunflower. Others remembered her as a bird or a butterfly, sometimes with life under her wings, sometimes death. An acquaintance from Paris saw her as a bright bird on a winter morning. One sunny winter morning, I stood outside the entrance to the Jacob Hotel. My attention was caught by a young woman who just walked out through the gate. She hesitated a bit and walked slowly down Rue de Saint-Perez, straight toward Boulevard Saint-Germain. It's probably pronounced wrong, but her gaudy clothes caused the sensation. Her dress was brown, her jacket and cap red. Around her neck she wore a very yellow fox. On her feet, green shoes. She looked like a goldfinch. She had a beautiful figure, and her movements were soft, her face tired, her eyes bright. Another in Poland saw her as fey creatures of the air, tall and serious, wrapped in black tulle, covered with black spangles. She looks like a butterfly in the morning, like a stormy petrel, a kind of deep seriousness in her barely visible little smile, in her amiable, hushed conversation, a few words in a foreign language. A young girl from Lund had seen her as a wild creature of the forest. In the middle of a ray of sun, Dagny and her young son danced and played. With his dark green velvet frock and his leather belt, with his blonde, tangled curls and his amusing, expression filled face, the boy looked like a little high spirited, gracious Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream. The mother's frizzy, dark blonde hair, parted in the middle, had fallen into disorder when, light as a bird, she jumped up on the big library table. The bun at the back of her neck had come loose. The color had risen in her otherwise ivory cheeks. She actually looked at that moment like some kind of Titania or wood nymph. I stood in the doorway, not wanting to disturb the beautiful sight. It was like accidentally surprising a deer with her young in the deepest thicket of the forest. Far from humans, narrow domains. One of the most astonishing descriptions of her was inspired by her eyes. To the boy who met her in Zakopane, she took on the persona of a sacred goat. A unique, very beautiful woman, her golden red hair was parted in the middle and fell down over her ears. She squinted a little with her fascinating and curious eyes when she looked at me. I was just a boy then, and shorter than she. These light, cold eyes under equally light eyelashes reminded me of the light-hearted and enigmatic eyes of a goat. If you have never seen a goat's eyes, a white goat, then look at them next time. An eternal, mild smile rests over such eyes, a smile that can mean everything and nothing. These wise goat eyes, this cold intellect, that picked up something beyond time and space. Perhaps the most powerful polar personae Dagny inspired, the one in which all the others are somehow subsumed, is the angel demon, the saint concealing the serpent, Venus the vampire. Some in particular, Strindberg and his sycophants, responded to the demon. I've only seen her in passing. She didn't make any special impression on me. I'm not taken with that kind. I go more for the solid, substantial ones. In all senses of the word, there seems to be something a little lean about her person. She is more snake than Eve, but however it is, she can bring about the fall. Strindberg is filtered through Uhl. Others, like the Polish painter Stanislaw Wyspiański, responded to the angel, but an angel with the curiously powerful eye of a goddess and the sensual woman, defenseless and under siege. Munch responded to both, the angel and the demon, the ethereal and the sensual woman, in a prophetic way, allowing the one to inspire the other, giving might and grace to both. And indeed, Munch may have understood best the powerful myth that his friend Dagny inspired. For both the angel and the demon are fantasies of transcendence, the angel to innocence, the demon to omnipotence. And there can be no greater fantasy in life than to be both innocent and all-powerful. There's Stanislaw Wyspiański's Dagny. Obviously just a drawing, a sketch. Munch's vision of Dagny remained attached to the human artist who created it. We understand that he viewed her with reasonable wonder and reasonable fear. But there were those who lost sight of the human longing in the vision. For them, she became literally the supreme being, and they had to destroy her. There was something of this in the Strindbergian hysteria that could not see the woman for Satan. But it culminated tragically in the crippled imagination of the young man who could not see the woman for God. Wyspiański's cartoon on the peon canvas. The hell is that? Is that a monster with her? There she is. Munch's Dagny, Juel, Przybyszewska, 1893. That she appeared to be an incarnation of the Absolute, that she was God, you will learn from others. I just want to tell you, to express it in an earthly way, she was a saint. She was goodness itself. She was goodness itself. The kind of goodness that is called regal, and that arises from contempt. Vladislav Emmerich, the man who shot Dagny, then himself, in a letter he had earlier written to her 5-year-old son, Zenon. What a sick bastard. Hey, I'm going to kill your mom, and then I'm going to write a letter. Beforehand, I'll explain to you what I know, even though you're 5 and I'm a fucking mental midget. All right. That's the end of chapter 2.